This was an absolutely brilliant moment in the original Halo Combat Evolved, whereupon you first see this beautiful vista and set out on your mission to rescue the remaining Marines. I still remember being blinded by this majesty. There's no dialogue nor any combat, and yet it's an unforgettable moment that wordlessly expresses the beauty of Halo. Let's see how the remake handled it.
419 to Cortana, come in. I've spotted additional lifeboats in your area. One near a rock slide, one near the cliff edge, and another near the head of the river.
This sequence is a disaster, and if you do not understand why, I've got a few things you really need to hear. Halo is uncomplicated. It's wrong to say, as some have, that it's a dumb, low-class game, but it's not a difficult game to understand either. It's pretty straightforward to appreciate what makes Halo good. As a retelling of Halo Combat Evolved, the new Campaign Evolved remake inherits the blueprint to a very refined, timeless game. This must be an easy opportunity, right? But as you can imagine, things have gone terribly awry. I see games as art, and I don't think art necessarily benefits from being redone. In fact, it can be detrimental, because society has a very limited bandwidth to its cultural memory, and every time a game is remade and image is reformed, there are many who will split and favor the remake and the changes therein, adding to the mimetic framework that may eclipse the original altogether. Video games are particularly vulnerable to this because they are a medium that uniquely benefits from technological advancement and the passage of time in that regard, so many just disfavor older games as a rule. Some say that a remake is a retelling. People have retold stories since time immemorial after all, and sure, you still have the originals, a technical fact which anyone batting for the remake is always eager to remind us of, but now the original is in competition for a cultural memory that was once its own. It now has to fight for cultural eminence against something whose foundational purpose is to usurp it. If that's not the case, then I ask, what purpose does a remake serve for our culture? Remakes are a flood, reanimating the corpses of works of art laid to rest, and the modern cultural mimetic framework that drives their production and consumption is the grave mind. These types of things are generally not being made as part of a high-minded effort to put an interesting new spin on the story or help it live up to unrealized potential, but as a business model which, if it has any artistic intention at all, is more closely linked to the priorities of the present-day game studio than any sense of honor or commitment with respect to the original. Remakes come with the fading of understanding of what symbols mean, cargo cultism, where symbols and rituals are passed down generation upon generation, with no appreciation or understanding of their original purpose. Eventually, the essence and purpose of the original work fades beyond human memory. Campaign Evolved is laden with this problem, as it is a remake of a game that has 25 years of successive franchise DNA, now retroactively corrupting the progenitor of it all. On an individual scale, this is mostly harmless. It's inevitable as franchises grow, but there does come a point where the corruption is so complete that whatever meaning was in the original work is now gone. And Campaign Evolved takes a great leap in that direction if we haven't already crossed that threshold long ago. Being a game about the descendants of a long-dead civilization arriving to their inheritance while ignorant of its true nature, it's fitting that Halo has come under the dominion of people who seem to consistently misunderstand or overlook important details, making the game an apt metaphor for itself. Without further ado, let's talk about the intro you saw there. Halo, the Ring, the name of the game and also the title of the most disambiguated level of all time, and one of the most cherished. The level where you land on the ring is a masterpiece, and my favorite moment ever since I first played this game in 2003 has always been when you see the reunion tour footer. I will tell you, Bungie knew what they were doing. They did not err when they put you out in the open on this amazing, unexplored ring world, emerging from a natural formation, on a level that escalates from a tense, lone survival survive or escape, to a desperate holdout, to you becoming the cavalry, arriving just in time to save everyone you can. Notably, you're given less direction than usual in this level, which is intended because you, in your car, are the first one ever to explore this canyon. A brilliant player opportunity. There is no one with knowledge with which to offer you vocal guidance, nor waypoints. Cortana and Foehammer do not know where these lifeboats have landed. There are no dead ends, though, besides obvious level boundaries. Drawing your attention to the Marines' crash sites are Forerunner lights illuminating passageways. The head of a river, a crashed lifeboat right by where you enter the valley, which your Marines will comment upon.
Weapons and supplies all over the place. Where's the bodies, though?
Which implies a safe landing, and also that the survivors can't be that far. The developers are encouraging you to explore and investigate, and they use the voice of the actual in-game characters following the narrative instead of just telling you what to do outright. The line about the lifeboat, however, got cut in favor of something else. You were supposed to navigate this area of your own volition, discover points of interest, find the Marines. And it's one of the most beloved moments in the entire game, even the franchise, and its appearance in the remake is marred by obnoxious decisions in the name of handholding. Guiding the player is fine. I don't really mind too much that they added flares showing where the lifeboats are, although you have to wonder how some of those got there. Perhaps they could have had the Forerunner lights be brighter, maybe redesign the terrain so that natural formations invite curiosity. That would be fine, but of course that's not what happens. Instead, they add nav markers, which immediately get plastered on your screen, taking your eyes off the gorgeous view in favor of having you chasing the little diamond like a cat fixated on a laser point. This reduces player inclination to observe the world around them, navigate it, build a mental map, and to think of it as a real place and remember its details. They also add some extraneous Cortana dialogue, which is laid on so thick in this game that she went from being my favorite part of the original game to being absolutely unbearable at times. This is after Foehammer has given you the exact instructions on where to go. Is Halo really a mission that needed this level of instruction for new players to be able to beat it? This was a mission imposed upon console gamers in 2001 in what was many of their first FPS games, and it went as far as to throw a car at you that you have to drive in a 3D space, and they were supposed to figure it out by themselves. I was 7 when I first played this game. It wasn't exactly arduous beating this level. I believe that this level, of all levels, is robust enough to hold up to the rigors of player experimentation and curiosity, unless we truly have gotten significantly dumber than we were back then. But what really poisoned the well for me as I played this section of the remake was the introduction to this nostalgic valley. Instead of hearing nothing but the music and maybe Marines cheering about your driving as you ascend this hill, you now have Foehammer babbling over the entire scene to drown the song out. There seems to have been some kind of misunderstanding, where the remake's designers thought the music was free real estate to claim in the name of some useless tutorializing dialogue. This dialogue is from the original game, but the context it was used in kept it from being so obnoxious.
I've spotted additional lifeboats in your area. One near a rock slide, and another near the head of the river. Hard to see from my altitude, but it looks like there are more survivors.
Instead of spoiling your first sight of the valley with its immediate objective delivered by Foehammer, you were left to your own devices for a while. After all, while it may seem aimless, every path leads to a lifeboat, so the exploration is not as daunting as it may seem. After saving your first group of survivors, it is then that Foehammer will relay to you the location of the other 2 crash sites. The reason that Foehammer gives you this dialogue then is because that is when she sees the crash sites for the first time. She has not been to this valley before you rescue the first group of people. That's why the dialogue is delayed. This was definitely not an accident, because this means of design was more complicated for Bungie to program. They had to account for which lifeboat you went to first, so that you would only hear Foehammer describe just the 2 locations you hadn't been to yet. That's a more difficult programming assignment, and they took it upon themselves because it fed into the logic that Foehammer was an actual person flying a Pelican and giving you information as it came to her. It also made sense from a gameplay perspective to issue some instruction there, because with one path cleared, the player would then run a risk of driving in circles. So Foehammer would tell you where the other 2 lifeboats are, but the burden of exploration remains upon you due to the lack of waypoints. This voiceover is enough.
I've spotted additional lifeboats in your area. One near the cliff edge, and another near the head of the river.
The remake now has her talking about all this stuff before she's ever seen the place. Here we have the cargo cult at work, though. The remake's designers did not understand why this was made the way it was, when it was perfectly executed for what Halo was designed to do. This has been reworked to the detriment of the design. Foehammer's voiceover went from a welcome bit of information to unnecessary hand-holding that ruins the music, distracts from the view, and doesn't make any logical sense. The fact that her dialogue varied depending on which site you visited first also made her feel more responsive and dynamic. Her descriptions of where to look were also more useful from a gameplay standpoint because the information you receive is more effective when you have already explored the valley and can understand that, say, the head of the river is a landmark in a place you already saw. Instead, she just lists a bunch of landmarks you haven't seen yet. From a gameplay standpoint, story presentation standpoint, game design elegance standpoint, this little spark of brilliance has become a total misconstruction. This may all sound like trivial nerd stuff or gatekeeping or whatever, but I am serious when I say Halo was a cultural phenomenon, one of the biggest that has materialized since I was born. This game used to be popular with large masses of normal people, and they were impressed by the beauty of the ring, and I doubt they would have been quite so impressed if, instead of being left to bask in the wonder and explore at their own pace, they had received ample instruction that encouraged them to advance as efficiently as possible, instead of working things out for themselves. If you've ever tried driving the same route with and without a GPS, you understand that learning the lay of the land allows you to appreciate the details more intimately. I am not demanding that people face a risk of being filtered by their inability to navigate. This isn't gatekeeping at all. Instead, I want them to have a chance to feel things out for themselves and appreciate the beauty before them, instead of being rushed to the next level like it's a dire threat that somebody could get lost for a second instead of a learning opportunity. In that respect, Campaign Evolved often feels more that it's about the destination than the journey, the waypoints being a symbolic representation of that. But enough with the abstractions for now. Let's look at some misconstructions that take the form of plain old mistakes, more akin to Foehammer talking about this valley she hasn't seen yet. There are many situations where the changes to the gameplay scenario contradict the original intention of the voiceovers, which have been retained, clearly putting the game at odds with itself and generating friction between the new vision and what trace amounts of the game's original soul remain visible. Let's take a look at some of these instances that bothered me the most across the game, where the context of dialogue is altered either by gameplay or successive dialogue changes to be unfitting. The most striking example of this is one line still in the game. In the original, Keith stops organizing the evac and is only speaking to combat teams, which, is consistent with the idea that this is the last lifeboat.
There's one last lifeboat. Quickly, get aboard before it launches.
In this version, the intercom has him evacuating large groups of people. At the same time, Cortana says there's one last lifeboat. They moved this dialogue from keys on the intercom around with no real regard for what he's saying would imply. But it gets worse when you actually see the cutscene. After the now inexplicably off-screen launch of your lifeboat, the game cuts to your lifeboat at great distance from the Autumn. A very bad edit, I have to say, but that's not the point right now. You then see a second lifeboat launch, only to get shot down behind you. But where did this lifeboat come from? It appeared to come out of an airlock adjacent to the one yours was in, and yet there were clearly no lifeboats visible there. This is affirmed by Cortana, stating that this was the last one. Did the directors know she said that? Did they know what it meant? It sure is dramatic, I guess, to see another lifeboat get shot down behind you, because these cutscenes are full of gratuitous action like that, but I can only assume this means that the cutscene was produced in vacuum, without significant coordination with whoever designed the actual gameplay, or much care for what the original game said. The gameplay narration and cinematic are a direct contradiction, despite taking place 10 seconds apart. As a quick example, the Maw originally had an optional armory located on a side path where you would fight an invisible flood ambush to be rewarded with an effectively unlimited supply of rockets. The remake has merged this armory so that it was a passageway on the way to engineering, meaning it cannot be missed, and yet Cortana still has a newly recorded line from the original game, telling you about this armory as if you haven't seen it already.
There is an armory station located near the engine room's entrance.
The line was recorded anew, heedless of its redundancy, like a cargo cult, a structure inherited and built upon without understanding. As far as emotional resonance goes, the example that does the most damage to this remake is what they do to the silent cartographer. In the original, there's a radio conversation where Sergeant Stacker says,
"Hey people, we got company coming. Let's set the table. Engage enemy forces on site. Chief, you gotta find the cartographer. We'll keep him busy as long as we can."
Upon returning to the surface after finding the silent cartographer, if you check up on the Marines gathered at the landing site in the original game, you would find these men dead upon your return, which was because they were attacked by the Covenant while you descended into the cartographer. That was the point of the radio conversation, to show that Sergeant Stacker was fighting them, meaning he died to aid in your mission to reach the cartographer. Such was the importance of the Chief finding Halo's control center. But in the remake, you will find that all the Marines are just fine. The game doesn't kill them because they did not account for the purpose of what Stacker was saying over the radio. His sacrifice is now unmade, being confined to a voiceover that does not reflect the gameplay reality at all. Obviously, in the original, the Marines are simply scripted to die, and there isn't actually a battle unfolding on the surface, but the fact that they are dead now is congruent with what you hear on the radio as far as the player's perspective is concerned. It's a good narrative presentation, and it is a disappointment to overrule a detail like that, especially given that it's internally inconsistent now, even if you factor the old game out of this conversation. A change which denies the world its persistence outside of player observation. For another line on the Truth and Reconciliation, I actually thought they cut the iconic a line which any of us who have played on Legendary are probably very familiar with. It just didn't play for me, and I wondered why they might have removed it, but upon replaying the level, it did play. It's still in the game. It's supposed to play, I think, but the scripting is really messed up, and I'm not even completely sure in what room you're supposed to hear it, but I can make an inference. It seems this exchange was rewritten so that the Marines would be saying you had to open your mouth in response to not the arrival of the lots of contact. No, it was prompted by Cortana's new unnecessary line warning you about stealth elites.
Stealth elites, watch your motion tracker and look for distortions in the air.
Contact! Lots of contact! No Covenant. You had to open your
Which,
mouth.
I'll digress a bit, does kill the tension of a really cool scene wherein previously you just wait and wait. Hear the eerie sound of a door open? What could that mean? Moment of silence follows and you hear the terrible screams of slain Marines before you even know there's danger before you. It was horrifying, it was brilliant, it was an awesome moment, and it works well to meet the tension of the panic scripted dialogue from the Marines. But it was apparently deemed more necessary to have Cortana tell the player there's a stealth elite, which completely defeats the purpose of an enemy having stealth mechanics to use against the player, and ruins what may be the scariest moment in the history of the Halo franchise that doesn't involve the Flood. But more to the point of this discussion is that it befouls the entire exchange with tutorial clutter, just like the Foehammer line earlier. It turns the Marine's exasperation into nonsense. The whole reason the Marine is frustrated with Cortana in the original is that she declared no apparent threat, so they let their guard down, and then a bunch of invisible sword elites start rushing you. The chaos unfolds, resulting in a frustrated Marine snapping at the super smart AI that falsely told him not to worry. In this version of the game, the Marine snaps at Cortana after she issues a specific warning about the threat. Why are you mad at Cortana? She's telling you about the stealth elites. Another line on the same level is that in the Truth and Reconciliation hangar, the original had a line where the Marines ask Cortana to hurry up and unlock the doors so they can escape.
Hey, which way should we go now? All the doors on this level are locked. Wait a moment.
signaling an anticipated delay. In this game, the remake, this entire exchange plays out only upon the conclusion of the battle in the hangar. Once everything is dead, you get the lines, and then the door opens immediately instead of being after some other waves of enemies as in the original. So she shouldn't have said working on it, she should have just said just another second, I'm almost done. This implementation of the same dialogue is defeated because of how the scripting has been mangled. The fact that this was pushed to the end instead of being in the middle of a desperate situation. There's no more urgency in the actual gameplay reality. When you round the corner to approach the first group of survivors on the level Halo before you get the Warthog, Cortana mentions to you that she's detecting survivors.
I'm reading a lifeboat beacon over the next hill. We should check to see if there are any survivors.
The remake added dialogue where Johnson replies to this line.
We should check to see if there are any survivors.
Cortana, great to hear your voice again.
He didn't do that in the original, because her line doesn't address the Marines, and it's given no indication of being a remote communication. It's spoken directly to the Master Chief alone, and refers to the Marines in third person, so she's presumably not broadcasting this. They just misunderstood the context of her dialogue. In a similar vein, there's a scene on Assault on the Control Room during the last fight the Marines partake in, where originally Cortana would tell the Marines to
Marines, hold your positions. We'll handle those guns.
to which they'd reply,
I'm in no hurry for a heroic charge on those guns, Cortana. Holding position.
The remake removes Cortana's order to remain put and has the Marines reply play unprompted.
We need to get up this ridge.
I'm in no hurry for a heroic charge on those guns, Cortana. Holding position.
Which implies that he just decided for himself that he was going to sit this one out. And it makes the Marine seem like an insubordinate coward instead of acknowledging the wisdom of Cortana sparing him from the fight. That may not sound like a substantial change, but it completely changes the context of his reply. It's the difference between him affirming Cortana's orders as opposed to acting on his own initiative. One of the most impactful discrepancies between gameplay and dialogue, one which I felt turned the game into something farcical, was how the Keyes rescue was handled. The remake added this hallway ambush with a ton of suicide grunts that just swarm you through the corridor. It's set up so that it's pretty hard for them not to blow away all your Marines, and Keyes too. A very annoying new encounter for an escort mission, right? But hey, not to worry. Even though the game tells you that you need to protect Keyes as your mission goal, and he can still die, he just respawns good as new, complete with the goofy co-op respawn glow effect that makes this look like a video game mechanic instead of something natural. This disaster also ruins the game's script because all the dialogue that was supposed to play during a lull in the fighting on the bridge now plays in the middle of all this chaos in a narrow corridor with a platoon of suicide grunts rushing you with grenades, exploding during the entire exchange.
I've been engaged by Covenant air patrols. Negative, Cortana. I've been engaged by Covenant.
Once you get through that, the level starts throwing a bunch of sword elites and stuff at you like Doom monster closets. I didn't like that section, but I guess they saw that Keyes was invincible now, so they should rebalance the situation to make it harder. But I would take the supposedly dreadful Keyes escort mission over this any day. I am sure a lot of people are going to praise the new design of this section in particular. Finally, they fixed this awful level by removing the escort mission and making the captain immortal, because it was such a terrible part of the old game. But you know, for how relentlessly people complain about the escort mission of Truth and Reconciliation, I've never found it to be that big of a problem in all my years. Maybe I'm lucky and my disc has a personalized, more survivable Captain Keyes. Maybe I'm just better at protecting the AI because I do it out of an obsessive habit even when it's not required, and I've gotten very good at it. That's probably the answer. But maybe the coin lands on heads every time for me and I'm just really lucky. I don't know what the deal is, but from my perspective, this escort mission with Keyes being considered this massive pain in the original, an absolute low point, is some kind of collective hallucination. It's not even the hardest part of the original level if you ask me. This is footage of me, now an old man with withered reflexes, playing the game on Legendary, on an original Xbox, with a messed up controller. It is not any harder than this footage makes it out to be. But luckily this version fixes the issue by having Keyes respawn, and a new line of dialogue is added where Cortana tells Keyes and the Marines to wait behind you as they charge ahead, heedless of her suggestion. I know people hate hate escort missions, but it was supposed to mean something that you saved Keyes from the belly of the beast, ripped him from the jaws of hell, and making it so that he cannot die makes the stakes feel artificial. To accept this remake's narrative, you have to pretend, use your imagination to carry the weight of the scene, instead of having the common sense to recognize that the game is telling you one thing and presenting another gameplay reality. Kinda like the thing about Stackhurst Marines no longer being dead. Having characters tell you that something is important while it has no actual gameplay effect is a classic case of ludonarrative dissonance. We are told Captain Keyes must be defended, but don't worry, it's just empty flavor dialogue for set dressing, instead of an actual objective. For how relentlessly the game tutorializes, it's interesting that they choose to have all this extraneous dialogue that would distract you from the actual gameplay. I consider this a narrative downgrade, even if it helps to assuage the game's frustrations. A similar bout of ludonarrative dissonance plays out due to an odd change they decided to implement with the scene where Keyes gives you his pistol. You remember how during the bridge cutscene, Captain Keyes gives you his sidearm and says it isn't loaded, so you'll have to find ammo as you go, and then you equip it and it has plenty of ammo? That was a weird thing in the original game. I was unsurprised and not outraged at the mere fact that they decided to change such a thing. Unfortunately, what they changed it to was far weirder.
Make sure my daughter gets this.
Keyes suddenly makes a personal request to give his pistol to his daughter if he dies. This is weird because there are obviously more pressing matters than the sentiments you have here. The original game did not slow down for such things for a reason, and if you want someone to carry around a memento as you ship him off to war, it should probably be something less obnoxiously huge than the Halo 1 pistol. Not to mention that this drastically changes the context of the chief being given the captain's gun, which was to help find his way safely to a lifeboat, a wise and practical action on Keyes' part, but now it's become a gratuitous personal favor, and one that seems improbable to succeed. There's a dangerously high probability that the captain's pistol would turn into ammo when you pick it up. It's also a bad choice as far as the original vision because the gun in the original cutscene's framing was fittingly an afterthought. All the emotional weight and intensity was in him handing over Cortana. Keyes only gives you the Halo 1 pistol after gameplay resumed and the cutscene was over. Moreover, this sequence has confused many people because it is not very well assembled in its own right. You see, the Gucci pistol he gives you is not actually the Magnum you start with anymore. What actually happens is that the Master Chief stows the captain's pistol in some pouch, never to be seen again until the game's final cutscene. So instead of drawing the pistol that Keyes hands you as you exit the bridge, when you engage the grunts in the remake, what's actually happening is you automatically pick up a different handgun laying beside a wounded Marine in the passageway. It's naturally intuitive to think that you are wielding the gun that the captain gave you, which looked exactly the same, but you are not. The fact that you are given a pistol at the end of the cutscene, but it's a pistol you're not allowed to use for some reason, only to then pick up an identical object that actually serves a gameplay purpose, is not intuitive, and it's no wonder it's confusing. There should never be a situation where you see the Master Chief pick up a recognizable in-game weapon, cut to gameplay, and then not have him be using that weapon, because that is completely incongruent with player expectations, and doesn't even make logical sense on its own anyway. It is foolish for Halo to place such narrative emphasis on an individual firearm. It is an error in storytelling that Keyes gives you a weapon framed as a precious memento, when the gameplay reality of Halo is that weapons are fairly disposable. What the cutscene treats as precious is identical in form to something players are used to throwing away in exchange for rocket launchers or whatever. That said, while the pistol is disposable, it's not useless, and still serves a valuable gameplay function, of course, being a fairly useful weapon throughout the game. The inverse side of this cutscene's problem is that the pistol has no gameplay availability despite supposedly being on your character at all times. You can't have a Chekhov's gun like this in a game and have it be something players are used to using all the time and then deny them the ability to use it when players might end up in various situations where they might wish they could use such a weapon but can't because the gun is only allowed to be a narrative tool instead of a gameplay asset. It severs the relation between cutscene and gameplay because it makes no sense that the Master Chief Chief is carrying around a pistol the entire campaign, but can't ever use a pistol on the level Truth and Reconciliation, and he can't use that pistol if he runs out of ammo for both of his other weapons, nor can he use it for any situation that might call for a pistol instead of the two weapons you have at the moment. In following this same gameplay narrative cohesion from the opposite approach, let's talk about another cutscene I didn't like as much. The ending cutscene of Two Betrayals is nothing short of a disaster. For such a low-stakes cutscene, just the Chief and Cortana talking for a moment before they teleport off, I was surprised how much I hated this. It is perhaps the most needlessly ruined cutscene of all because it's incomprehensible why they would do this. In this version, they have the discussion occur while the Master Chief is fighting in the cutscene, which is one of the greatest Halo transgressions possible if you understand Bungie's original cinematic versus gameplay intention. There he is, battling Sentinels, getting hit, returning fire, killing masses of them. It's terrible. How often do you see the Master Chief fire a weapon in cutscenes? It almost never happens, right? Even though he almost always has one, even though he spends the whole game shooting aliens. Have you noticed how vanishingly little he actually fights in cutscenes? Notably, in Bungie games, cutscenes would often end with the Master Chief pointing his weapon at the enemy. This is a signal, because the Master Chief readying a weapon shows the game transitioning into your paradigm of operation as the player. Cutscenes otherwise stay in their lane. The Master Chief is at his coolest when you're controlling him, especially true in Halo 1. His actions are expressed through your gameplay. Why would you have him fight in a cutscene when fighting is what you, the player, are resolved to do? Having him save a Marine in a cutscene is great, or having him watch a video log and display some emotion. That's the kind of business this guy gets up to in cutscenes, but fighting is your responsibility alone. In Halo, we play the game to fight. That's the player's expression, our mark upon the world. The Master Chief, as a character separate from the player, has a different role to play, where he talks to people, strikes cool poses, or does other things that are not at all like the gameplay. Meanwhile, his cutscene battle against these Sentinels looks like exactly the kind of thing that should be happening in gameplay, which makes it a serious encroachment upon the player's role in the story. The cutscene is saying, also, that this is how the Master Chief fights, not in the way you might do it perhaps, a betrayal of your player experience, and not the impression you might have had of the Chief. Frankly, I don't think many can relate to this cutscene because the action is completely lackadaisical. I don't imagine the Master Chief surviving very long if he fought like this on Heroic or Legendary. He's just trading fire, taking Sentinel beams upon himself without trying at all to evade it, and somehow it works, even on Legendary. He's shooting a bunch of them down with his trusty cutscene issue assault rifle, which isn't even a good weapon to use against Sentinels in the first place, meaning that there's no way this cutscene will be at all consistent with the gameplay. To have the Master Chief stealing our thunder, fighting in cutscenes, severs the bond that the player has with this character, showing him to act differently than you had been led to believe. Shooting down Sentinels can happen just fine in gameplay under the player's direction, and it looks nothing like this. And before anyone brings up something like the Halo 2 bomb sequence or ripping the Flood off the Prophet of Mercy or something, the matter is not the mere fact of killing something, but fighting in the exact same way the player does, something that the player's field of agency is completely capable of covering. This principle was a real thing they were aware of, and in videos like the Halo 2 making of documentary, Bungie talked about how they believed cinematics and gameplay to have different roles as part of the same story. Here we see them intermixed to the detriment of the greater whole. The gameplay reality and narrative contradicting each other for the sake of cutting the player out of their proper place in the story. You know, show don't tell. The rule of thumb in movies where you should play to the strengths of your medium and tell the story through the means available to you. Not have a character just stand there talking at the camera, but actually use the visual means at your disposal. For video games, I've proposed a similar heuristic called play, don't show. Video games are a means of storytelling, and just as any other medium has its own way of expressing itself, for video games, that is generally the gameplay. To turn this video game scenario, already represented as the game's main attraction, into a cutscene, a non-interactive movie that you watch, is to abdicate the greatest storytelling strength of the video game. If violating a sacred principle isn't enough of a problem for you, the cutscene makes up for it by being outwardly annoying.
Get to the captain.
No, that'll take too long.
You have a better idea?
There's a teleportation grid that runs...
The tone here is comedic, with the Chief and Cortana having funny dialogue over the action, creating a juxtaposition. I get what they were going for. I just don't find it very funny, especially given how inconsistent it is with the baseline reality of the game. I do not believe that the Master Chief is someone who chats casually while exchanging fire with robots that are hitting him with laser beams. Part of the reason that the Master Chief is silent during gameplay during the Bungie era is because they wanted your mindset to be consistent with what he is doing in-game, how he acts when fighting, instead of him talking to reveal that his thoughts are inconsistent with how you feel when the game is in session. The Chief does not say or do anything to contradict you. There's nothing in any of the cutscenes to suggest that the Master Chief's fighting style is not consistent with your preferred gameplay methods. This breaks that impression, making him apparently the kind of guy to casually chat while doing tactical sweeps. Even if you think that's cool and all, it shatters the faith of those who would imagine themselves under his armor. I want to talk about the emotional weight of the destruction of the ring because a lot of changes to the game, some subtle and some overt, undermine this original construction. One of the first things that always gets betrayed in any remake is environmental storytelling. It goes overlooked because people either remember a game by its raw dialogue or they remember it through wiki page consumption. What people don't remember is the experience, the general vibe, the atmosphere, the subtle environmental cues, and these, while not necessarily being of the utmost importance, individually build up into a very important means of storytelling. There was, for instance, a deliberate reason that Forerunner architecture looked weathered, covered in scratches, rough around the edges. The weathered appearance of the structures on the ring suggests a greater harmony between the Forerunner architecture and the natural world than a persistent, unblemished structure actively resisting all natural forces for eons. The weathering may seem like a small detail, but it was obviously part of Bungie's vision, to give this feeling that you're exploring ancient, lost ruins like the Roman Colosseum, which, though remarkable in craftsmanship, obviously shows its age. Whatever the Forerunners built these structures out of is strong to have stood the test of time, but not strong enough to have gone completely unblemished by over 10,000 years of inclement weather. The game's own phrase, from a line pointing out that the ring's weather isn't some stable climate that's carefully curated to the whims of its designers for their own comfort. The ring is an actual, living, breathing world that's largely been left to its own devices by the intention of the Forerunners. The fact that the ring is left to its own devices, also, is part of what makes it so beautiful. It is a wilderness instead of the garden you might expect from its artificial construction. This is also reflected in another line that plays if you wander towards the waterfall when you first desecrate the ring with your filthy footsteps. Cortana will remark upon the ring's ecosystem. Thousands of types of flora, she'll say. This line is meant to reinforce the natural wonder of the ring. Cortana is surprised here for the same reason she's surprised at the inclement weather. The ring's biodiversity is a testament to its untamed nature. This line about flora, however, was cut from the remake. I suspect they didn't want Cortana saying things that aren't directly related to gameplay to interrupt her dialogue about the dropship searching for you. Whatever the case, it's a waste not to have her show this amazement at the ring. Another art design change to the ring is that there are distant background landscapes which reveal lit-up massive superstructures that stretch across the surface of the ring, often being so immense as to cover the entire breadth of it, and there are many of these. But where, in the original or the remake, are these structures up close? We never see such things. This goes against the original intent that Forerunner architecture was mostly beneath the surface, with those structures you do see being fairly uncommon and generally quite small in the grand scheme of things, with a world committed to hosting untamed wilderness instead of massive, ostentatious superstructures. This does not look like a world in harmony anymore. The original form of the ring with this idyllic landscape, largely untouched by apparent construction, symbolized the ring's role in the story. Though it may look beautiful, there are many dark things hidden beneath that are better left obscure. Overall, the Forerunner aesthetic in this ring leans a bit too techy. It looks honestly more fitting for the Covenant or for something something like the Protoss from StarCraft, less like ancient ruins that have stood the test of time, and more like whimsical technical marvels. For Honor architecture has always had a beautiful but grave look to it, a brutal demeanor. A design meant to evoke the death of this civilization while emphasizing sort of a classical artisan nature. It's not meant to be pristine. The overly shiny metallic look is too refined and ageless for what the Forerunners are supposed to have left behind. The exterior of the ring is probably the worst example, where this simplistic, shiny metallic architecture fails to represent either the scale or the style of the original ring's design, with the highly distinct figures visible on the exterior of the ring making it look rather small, whereas the original ring has this web work of indistinct lines and circles like a city viewed from space, or the exterior of the Death Star if you prefer. The small size and indistinct nature of all the bits and baubles on the outside of the ring are what give the ring the impression of immensity on a planetary scale. The big glowing circles all over it make it look smaller, like a bracelet or something. Oddly enough, the game's ending cutscene presents a fleeting shot of a ring that looks quite a lot better than what is so prominently featured in the main menu. The culmination in the ring, of course, is its destruction. Halo's ending cutscene was an absolute masterwork, and it got butchered due to what I can only assume was a deep misunderstanding of the material. The cutscene was bittersweet. As the ring comes apart, Cortana asks, "Fancy a look?" The chief gets up, walks to the window, and silently watches. And that's important. Do you understand why the longsword has such a seemingly unnecessarily spacious interior? Lore nerds have debated this for decades. Well, let me elucidate. The reason for all this empty space in the longsword is so that the Master Chief can get out of his seat, walk across the deck, and look out a window so that he can gaze upon the destruction he wrought during a quiet moment of reflection. Then he could go back to his seat, find his resolve, and take his helmet off with his face obscured by the top of the airframe. That is why the longsword looks the way it does. It was not to satisfy some lore consideration, some strategic necessity of the UNSC, or some tactical benefit of its huge size. No, it was for this. And after that moment, a somber song plays. Cortana suddenly feels the need to justify your action. While obviously the greatest loss was all the humans who had died in the course of your victory, the destruction of the ring itself is much more tragic than people tend to appreciate. The ring was not the Death Star. It was a world full of life and wonder. The wondrous Forerunner architecture that stood as a lasting testament to their craftsmanship and artistry. All the plants and animals, well, the original game didn't have much in terms of animals, but there were bugs and you could hear birds chirping, and that made me sad to consider as a kid. Along with all of those went the inclement weather, the thousands of types of flora, all sacrificed to stop this world itself from exterminating all life in the galaxy. It is poetic. The ring's destruction was never purely a happy victory. But this game does not sell that impression as well, mainly because of the cinematography. It hurt to cut that dialogue about the biodiversity. It hurt to change the longsword to have a cramped fighter cockpit, which does not allow the Master Chief to stand. It hurt to do away with the reflective tone by having cheap tension with debris flying around the longsword instead of being like the original. Let's talk about the cinematography here because it is a mess. The cutscene is reshot to move the inconsequential line about shutting down the engines between the ring exploding and the chief asking if anyone else made it.
Shut them down. We'll need them later.
Which means that Cortana and the Master Chief's reaction to this world-shattering event at their hands is to fuss over the engines with an apparently very nonchalant delivery by Cortana. That had already happened in the original. It did not interrupt this emotionally intense moment. The Master Chief was originally shaken before he even heard Cortana say no one else made it. Now, the ring's destruction itself is an afterthought. It has nothing to do with the sadness of this conversation. The scene has no indication of tragedy to our heroes until they start talking about the human loss. Cortana's preceding line about the engines ruins the impression that she was sad up to that point. She might as well have asked the chief for coffee or something with how that's delivered. And most damningly, she never says fancy a look. That was one of the best lines in the game. The chief just kinda turns his head to the side, the character's not having any other reaction to the loss of the ring itself. Then the Master Chief's helmet is not removed and set on his lap. Perhaps it's because the longsword's extended canopy would not allow for the game's original shot to obscure the Chief's face. Whatever the case, now there's just a close-up and the game just cuts to black before he takes his helmet off, and it's a corny action shot instead of a quiet and contemplative one. The little things matter, and the remake took every opportunity to reduce the importance of the ring as an object of emotional weight, beyond adding some fauna, which is nice, but kinda covered already if you're able to infer what birds chirping means. This cutscene is just a disaster that takes a bunch of base elements and throws them into a blender, and all you have now is a jumbled mess of components fitted together with no appreciation for the form they were supposed to make. So, as a Marathon fan before I ever played Halo, I always loved the fact that this game included a motion tracker. Every game should have one, I thought. I thought about this, though, a great deal because this fancy new motion tracker was better implemented, with some interesting new features that Marathons did not have. One of the most oft-forgotten things about Halo 1 is that the motion tracker isn't supposed to be displaying symbology. The blips are meant to be a direct readout of the detected signature, like how on a radar interface, a B-2 stealth bomber will be a tiny dot, but a passenger jet will be a huge cloud. It's not meant to be a software interface that turns blips into symbols of some particular size and color for reader convenience, even if that is technically what's happening by gameplay logic because it is a video game. The circular blips in Halo 1's motion tracker are rendered like phosphorescence, being soft and fuzzy because they're the literal visual representation of the signature. Corroborating this is the fact that there are different signatures for things of varied mass and size. The logic of this is not meant to be that, oh, hunters are pinged and registered so that they're rendered as a big red dot for your convenience. Hunters, and vehicles being larger and more massive, have a bigger report and appear as big red blobs instead of the usual little red dot for that reason. It would indeed not take long for other Halo games to forget this detail with regards to the hunters. Even though their size increased as the games went on, they would usually be rendered as regular red dots. It goes the other way too for smaller things. The flood infection forms are tiny little pinpoints on your motion tracker. Because their small size means they give a smaller readout. This is a flavorful element of Halo, and the design of the motion tracker's blips and the way it reacts to differently sized entities was perfect cohesion between form and function. The design had an important gameplay benefit because hunters and vehicles are a threat that matches their size profile, whereas individual flood infectors are such a minuscule threat that they can usually be safely ignored. It's very useful to be able to tell hunters apart from flood infectors, to pick hunters out of the crowd, or to tell if the only red dot moving towards you is just a little infector. This motion tracker was a tight package of storytelling through artistic design while having important gameplay consideration. This has been forgotten. Hunters, infection forms, whatever, they're all equally represented on the motion tracker. Vehicles are rendered now as decals, which makes it incredibly obvious that this is supposed to be a symbolic representation rather than an analog readout. Meanwhile, hunters and infectors being the same size leads to many situations where the motion tracker becomes less useful than it originally was in-game because of the lack of easy distinction. And the fact that the gentle circular phosphorescence of the original has been rendered instead as flat-colored diamonds immediately demonstrates that these are representative symbols instead of direct readouts. I always found the infectors to be creepy on the motion tracker because they would form these clouds befitting their nature as a threat that saturates the environment, just covering the floors and walls. They didn't have distinct individual reports. It just sort of blended together. But even then, their radar cloud was useful information. It wasn't obstructive to the point that the motion tracker was complete noise the way it is now. When these infectors show up in the remake halfway through the game, the motion tracker is barely worth paying attention to anymore because a swarm of elites or flood combat forms is indistinguishable from the spore cloud. The feedback it gives is useless. The game undermines the original's design here because the motion tracker was imported from post-Bungie games which did not have the flood in them, and so had no need to regard large masses of tiny enemies to keep the motion tracker from becoming useless. Another issue with the motion tracker is that sometimes it fails to work in accordance with the game's story presentation now. When crossing this log in the original 343 Guilty Spawn, Spark, you would see some blips on your motion tracker, and it was really unsettling. A lot of people don't give Halo the credit it deserves, using a basic UI element that just has a gameplay function for the whole game. Now for a story sequence, that's inspired. You see the tracker lit up with supposed friendlies approaching you from all sides in the swamp, only to mysteriously vanish. It's very creepy, as this behavior is not consistent with anything you'd have become comfortable with on any level before. And while you can catch glimpses of whatever it is out there, the motion tracker makes their detection much more noticeable, while giving nothing away about their true nature, allowing the surprise to be maintained. It's a great cinematic moment, storytelling through gameplay features, and it's been botched in the remake, despite someone's apparent effort to include it. Part of the problem that so many remakes face is that everything is done in composite. One team's fixing up the textures, another's doing sound design, there's the gameplay group, and so on. They don't have the same close level of coordination as the original game design effort might have, so you get moments like this. In the remake, the flood in the swamp actually do still ping as non-hostile if you can get in motion tracker range of them. I doubt this was by accident. I think someone on the remake team was detail focused and wanted that to be like the original game. There's just one problem with that person's intent. The motion tracker's range is reduced, which makes it almost impossible to see the flood on it here. This totally dampens the encounter, especially since this game has sort of the opposite problem of Anniversary, where it was way too bright and you could just immediately tell what the flood were as soon as you saw them out in the open in the swamp. Now they actually decrease the visibility, which I don't dislike. It's a pretty environment and it serves the narrative well, but it's just kinda hard to even notice that the flood silhouettes are even there now. I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't played the game and assumed they would be there. They're also never close enough to register on the motion tracker, which won't point you at them. The only way I even saw that they appeared as friendly on the tracker was by equipping the night vision modifier and sprinting straight towards these apparitions. Somebody's thoughtful consideration to make these aliens not appear as hostile red dots was ruined by another's decision to reduce the motion tracker. So you have right hand versus left. And as another quick example to prove this hypothesis and show that I'm not just speculating here, many were disappointed that they apparently cut the dialogue responses from attacking Guilty Spark, where he would, passively chide you. It was a funny moment that also served to characterize Spark. However, the internet is half wrong in this assessment because while they botched the delivery, the game still does include the voice lines for attacking the monitor, and it has the scripting for them to play when the player does so. The problem is that he's intangible, so projectiles and melee attacks simply phase through him without connecting. I was able to trigger this newly recorded dialogue by hitting him with an explosive blast. That's the only way to get it to play, which belies the entire effort to account for the player attacking him. One element of the team went through all that trouble of getting the voice performance, and another scripted it so that Spark would properly react to damage, but somebody else thought it was a good idea to make Spark intangible for some reason, maybe to keep players from getting confused. I don't know, but whatever the case, one's work negated the others. The reason this is part of the cargo cult is a more meta example, not so much for the game itself, but for the method and practice of game design, with non-cohesive sects of developers mimicking the practice of their individual craft that went into the original game, but lacking the overhead structure that enabled the coordination that tied gameplay, art, story, and scripting together. Anyway, the motion tracker was just one of the methods by which your suit's display was integrated into the gameplay reality and the narrative. This was something Halo took seriously. It's meant to be immersive. The entire world was created for one unified purpose: to invent a scenario where the culmination of human ingenuity, discipline, and strength, who distinguishes himself to a degree theretofore only ever achieved in myth. This is why your character is so highly efficient at killing and good at surviving when every other trained professional warrior is unable to compare. You're not like them, you're a Spartan in a unique battlesuit. And that battlesuit is a key component of this game's narrative, and it's got more to it than just being a man-portable shield generator, a fact which has been taken for granted. Look at the tutorial with the crewmen. You'll notice they don't say, "Sir, I need you to move the control stick so we can begin." In terms of the player experience, they are testing your ability to walk, observe your surroundings, surroundings and look around. This was important because Halo used an unconventional at the time dual analog control scheme. Bungie was concerned it would be troublesome to learn. The original game had hand-holding, you see, but it wasn't annoying. Part of that is because this is framed to the actual narrative, in addition to being skippable. This tutorial is an in-universe necessity, where they run a diagnostic of the suit's targeting system. The reason you have a reticle that turns red extends from this logic, where it points at enemies and turns red because your suit's targeting system has registered the threat. Health and shields are on-screen information that the Chief is as privy to as the player. Nav points and target markers are something Cortana sets, usually explaining that she is doing so. And it's this kind of diegetic logic in the HUD is why adding hit markers is stupid. How does your suit know if a grenade you threw around a corner hit somebody or not? This isn't just me saying old thing good, new thing bad. The remake added another new HUD element, a green reticle appearing over friendlies. That's good, I like that, it makes sense. It belongs in this game. Halo 1 was kind of weird for not having it. No reasonable person will complain about this, as even the colorblind's needs are met because you can customize the color. What a great new feature! I can appreciate when they do things like this that are actually good instead of bad. As for hit markers, mercifully you can turn them off without affecting the experience much. But why are they even here? They're not part of Halo's story. I know we have to court the Call of Duty audience, but are hit markers really an important feature, my fellow gamers? Do we really need to see a HUD indication when blood flies out of your target and an enemy screams and falls to the floor motionless? We know what that means, right? There is room for friendly green reticles in the framework of the original Halo. But hit markers are another story. They do not aid the immersive design of the original. It contradicts the game's original vision of your suit's display actually meaning anything, and is instead a stronger commitment to 343 era Halo design that started a decade later. This is the cargo cult at work. As for nav markers, these too are still present, but have been abused far beyond their original design. They were a harmless feature that added to the game, but have been made into a condescending nuisance. Nav markers belong in Halo, so don't tell me to turn these off. There are a couple times in Halo CE where it actually makes some sense to want nav markers, like when you get in a Banshee in 2 Betrayals, and Cortana marks one on a platform way above you where the pulse generator is. Now that's pretty useful, because it's way up and off to the side in the mist in a location that's pretty difficult to spot. It would also be very weird if you had the nav marker turned off here when Cortana has dialogue discussing that she is leading you to that position via nav marker. So it's a ridiculous argument to say, oh, you can just turn off this intentional feature of the game that characters explain to you in dialogue. The nav markers, unlike the hit markers, are an actual in-universe capability of the Master Chief's suit, which operates according to the same real-world logic that has been implemented into navigational aids for military aircraft before Halo came out. This is Gulf War technology. Bungie based this off of that, except now your suit has the whole sensor suite of a fighter complete with 3D rendering of information. This was not meant to be gameplay contrivance. It was used to good ends that did not detract from the game. Now these nav markers are used excessively to the benefit of people who can't understand what to do when you're in a room full of arrows pointing at a green lit up door and the door you came in from is locked and has turned red. They have the remake's new voiceover where Cortana explains the purpose of these mysterious arrows that consistently point in the direction that you have to go.
Huh. These lights seem to be responding to our proximity and guiding us to the exit.
I do not want to assume anything so bold and offensive as that a meaningful proportion of gamers have weaker intuitive reasoning skills than I did as a little kid, but perhaps Microsoft felt differently. Maybe this is a response to the fact that this is the first Halo game on PlayStation and Microsoft just assumes PlayStation gamers are incredibly dumb. But who can say? A couple other things about these markers. The tutorial has nav markers, which makes Cortana's introduction of them later rather superfluous. Also, about that tutorial, it's a little silly. The crewman asks you to stand on the famous red square.
Stand on the red square, please.
Which used to be very easy to spot, but now is on a more visually busy floor that makes it nearly invisible, making for an unintentionally apt metaphor for redesign principles that go into remasters. Furthermore, this red square is of course given a navigational waypoint in case you can't find your way around the cryo bay. God help you. And to turn this into the farce it needs to be, the red square is surrounded by yellow paint. Of course. Even though you are verbally directed to a separate yellow square later, this is why I keep saying cargo cult. I doubt the people who did this ever considered that there might be a conditional use for waypoints. Maybe they get paid by the waypoint, but adding to this Tower of Babel phenomenon, like the motion tracker where one man's effort was neatly undermined by another, the crewman has a fancy new animation where he points at the square that he wants you to step on, you know? That's great. It helps guide players without being annoying in any way. After all, it looks like a thing a person would do while talking. It's natural. You can't complain about a thing like that, except to say that it was enough. But that animation is like a vestigial organ. It's not able to do its job because the function was taken up by these ridiculous waypoints. In addition to waypoints, the game also has target markers, like the ones that show up in the end of a firefight set in Reach. These were used sparingly in CE. The only one I'm even aware of is an uncommon event where Cortana targets a grunt running for a shade turret. Again, the target marker is meant to be diegetic, a representation of Cortana signaling a target. What's funny is that in the remake, these show up constantly, infamously appearing on invisible elites, which is another self-defeating design choice where all the art and programming that made these invisible elites a tough adversary is rendered pointless because they're given a plainly visible target marker. It really is the Tower of Babel. And if someone dares suggest that this is some lore-friendly commitment to Cortana giving you these target markers, I suggest you consider the implications of the supposition that your armor can detect invisible aliens all the time and display that in 3D. So why aren't these markers just automatically applied to every invisible enemy? Wouldn't that be useful? Remember always that the HUD elements you see in Halo were always supposed to be a real part of this universe, an actual display that your character was seeing, and he reacts to them for the same reason that you react to them. Every nav marker was placed for the chief as much as the player. If the player is really dull enough to need these waypoints everywhere, then Cortana must think that the chief is also dumber than my 7-year-old self, and I won't stand for that. Furthermore, with the addition of hit markers, it seems clear that the only consideration for these HUD elements was not whether they actually fit into the story, but player convenience. And you may agree or disagree with that priority, but the original Halo had a higher concept in mind, a holistic vision, instead of something so ordinary. If I had to pick one thing this game handled poorly across its entire experience, it was not the newly introduced ludonarrative dissonance, it was not the characterization of the ring, nor was it the newly awkward dialogue. I regret to inform you that the most consistent failure point of the remake was Cortana. Cortana was the heart and soul of the original game. I loved her in it. She was perhaps the best thing about Halo, being an extremely well-designed companion character that respects the player's boundaries, while also being a fully realized and interesting character. In a world with characters like Alex Vance, Midna, Metal Gear Solid's entire array of colorful radio contexts, somehow Cortana stands out as one of the best companion characters in the history of the medium, and nowhere was her role executed with such focus and brilliance as the first game. She's good in Halo 2 and 3, but is absent for sizable portions. Cortana is indispensable to the experience of Halo 1, and unfortunately, the remake actually found a way to make me dislike her.
Our fighters are mopping up the last of their recon picket now, nothing serious. But I've isolated approach signatures for multiple CCS-class battle groups. Make it 3 capital ships per group. And in about 90 seconds, they'll be all over us.
In the original, on this scene on the bridge, Cortana sounded like a professional officer with a sense of humor. She had a vibrant personality that occasionally shone through, but was reverent when appropriate to the situation. She makes jokes, yes, but she usually sounds concerned for the well-being of others, especially the forces under her command. This is a difficult needle to thread because it runs the risk of being the sort of Marvel-esque dismissal of serious situations that we've all come to be quite sick of. But Cortana was exemplary because she just comes off as a real person in her emotional variance rather than treating the situation she's in like a funny, quirky video game scenario.
Our fighters are mopping up the last of the recon picket now. Nothing serious. But I've isolated approach signatures for multiple CCS-class battle groups. Make it 3 capital ships per group. And in about 90 seconds, they'll be all over us.
In this version of the cutscene, she has all the conviction of a teenager polishing her nails. So many of her lines have been robbed of their urgency or concern, or have this newly added layer of snarkiness and irreverence that gets to be extremely overbearing and utterly tarnishes her character. It's almost all the same dialogue voiced by the same actress, but the tonal inflection she carries throughout often makes her sound obnoxious or disrespectful. The performance just does not exhibit her more professional or somber demeanor at all. And the game suffers a lot from this because Cortana usually defines the game's emotional valence and is the heart of the story, yet her dialogue in the remake consistently gives the wrong impression. The reason that I factor this in as a cargo cult instead of just not being good at something the original did well is because I think there was deliberate effort to make her sound like this without understanding the proper balance of her character's tone in the original story. Upon seeing the bodies of the lifeboat occupants after you crash, Cortana observes that there's nothing you can do. A line that always stuck out as really sad to me.
The others, the impact. There's nothing we can do.
The others, the impact. There's nothing we can do.
In the original, she sounded past the point of mourning, sad but defeated. Here she sounds very matter-of-fact about it, far more curt than before. Compare that to when you arrive in the Autumn's mess hall.
Those Marines could use some help, Chief. Do what you do best.
Those Marines could use some help, Chief. Do what you do best.
The original is clearly a better display as there's some urgency to it, but she's also encouraging. This is a great commanding officer voice. As for the remake, the main issue is how her reading seems smug. It doesn't sound like it's being said with any real regard for the danger that the Marines are in. It's more like, tee-hee, those aliens won't know what hit them, will they? But her worst line of all in the new version is when, on the lifeboat, she says,
I knew it. The Autumn's accelerating. Keys is going in manual.
That was such a great performance. This is the payoff to her earlier line, where she advises the captain to use her subroutines. She sincerely knew this was coming, but she's still caught up in amazement during the lifeboat sequence. She's concerned too. Keyes is defying her recommendation to take the ship on a manual landing course, and she doesn't know what will happen. How did the remake handle this?
I knew it. The Autumn's accelerating. Keys is going in manual.
That's terrible. The new line sounds totally wrong. She sounds spiteful about it, like she's sneering. How dare that jerk ignore my precious subroutines? The nerve of him! It's really not even close to the tone of the original. Why is she like this across the game? Maybe it was to give her some more flair, maybe it was because she's been reinterpreted as this sassy character. I think it's because the people who orchestrated this game either didn't coordinate well enough with the actress, or directed her to be more like the weapon from Halo Infinite. A character whom she sounds exactly like, not because that game is more recent and the voice actress is older, but because she has the inflections and matches the tone, the personality of this completely different character. The original game was a delicately balanced project that had coordination from a tight-knit team operating under one roof, where the gameplay designer and the composer could sit down with the voice actors and describe what kind of atmosphere the scene was supposed to have to aid in the performance. This is more valuable than listening to a performance you made 25 years ago and trying to emulate it, or whatever they might have done. And the lack of that kind of close-knit coordination affects everything, including vocal performances, which are not a one-man show. I don't necessarily blame the actress because this sounds too intentional. I think there was deliberate misguided intention rather than a failure to execute. The problem is that the vision has changed into something inferior that misses the point of the original. That would make Cortana sound like a completely different person while saying the same lines. I want to assume they dismissed the idea that there was anything worth learning from a 25-year-old video game acting performance, but this clearly isn't the case in a remake that at least appreciated the original enough to keep most of the voices from the original, like Fohammer and the Marines and so on.
Hey, I didn't know you made house calls, Fohammer.
You know our motto. We deliver. Never.
So I'm puzzled by how they failed this spectacularly. Another annoying point about Cortana is that she overtly explains basic gameplay actions like assassinations or the newly added boarding mechanics.
If you get close, you can hijack that Covenant vehicle. If you can get behind them, one melee hit to the back will neutralize most hostiles.
But this betrays the original vision of her character. Her job was never to tell you how to beat up aliens, because the Master Chief would presumably know this already, and have done this before, so his ability was reflected in what you could do in-game, not in what other characters informed you he was capable of. In Halo 2, when you first gain the ability to board vehicles, the button prompt is your first indication. There's no voiceover from an NPC telling you that, which is a testament to the fact that the Master Chief already knows this or just figured it out as he went. The Master Chief can board vehicles because he is a strong, skilled, and clever warrior who's able to handle such a maneuver, not because he needed a disembodied voice to explain to him that he should jump on a ghost and throw the driver out. Cortana did give the player some guidance in fighting aliens in the first game, but it was cleverly framed in a way that presumes the Master Chief already does know how to fight. Useless expository dialogue that involves characters explaining things to a recipient that the speaker already knows is aware of what they are saying does not get a free pass in movies, so I don't see why it should in video games just because the main character doesn't talk much or just because it benefits the player. In the original game, Cortana would clue you in on using rockets to blow up hunters, not by saying you should do that, but by mentioning that Bravo 22 was bringing rocket launchers because Cortana saw you were up against hunters. The player is left to intuit a fact of gameplay reality that the Master Chief would have already known, that rockets are good against hunters. Likewise, Cortana teaches the player how to fight using stealth in the original game, but this is framed not as her giving direct instruction to the Master Chief, but as her coordinating a plan between the Master Chief and the Marines. She describes the actions the player should perform, covertly taking out as many of the Covenant as you can using your sniper rifle, but this is not achieved by saying you should do this and that. It's telling you that the Marines are part of a plan and then explaining what you're going to do to the sergeant so that he knows to hold his fire until the stealthy approach has run its course.
The Master Chief is going to covertly take out as many of the Covenant as he can. Don't open fire until you hear the enemy return fire on us. That should let us keep the element of surprise.
This is nothing short of brilliant. It preserves the dignity of the Master Chief as someone who does not need to hear an explanation on basic tactics while informing the player of how they should go about this mission. In the new game, this brilliant design is ruined because Cortana has this pattern of excessively telling you how to do all sorts of things as if she'd know better than the man who's been doing it for years. Even when those things are self-evident through gameplay, she will tell you, don't worry.
My analysis suggests our exit will be behind a green-lit door. Scan the area, Chief. I've placed a nav point to mark a potential route. Flank and hit their exposed worm bits. Active camouflage device. It will make us invisible. Wait, the Covenant and Flood are attacking each other. I recommend we wait until they've worn each other down. Then we'll only have to deal with this dragon.
When I figured this out on my own playing the original Halo, it was the first time I had ever seen this kind of thing in a game, and it felt like a natural discovery. Like the world was revealing itself to me through its nature, instead of Cortana bragging about a feature of the game. Have you ever wondered what overshields do? Probably not, right? You pick up an overshield and your shields go over, so to speak, which you can see, and then the screen says picked up overshields. If you needed help though, this version of Cortana has a new dialogue addition to tell you that overshields make your shields go over.
That's a Covenant overshield. I've created an interface patch that will let you use the device to augment your shields.
And not only is the function of overshields incredibly self-evident so as to make this unnecessary, I have to wonder, what are the stakes of anyone failing to understand what overshields do that would justify sitting Jen Taylor down in a recording booth? Worst case scenario, someone gets to survive a little longer without knowing why. They'll be fine. Same thing with active camouflage. Oh, this thing that makes my weapon and hands invisible makes me invisible? Good to know, Cortana. Cortana obviously isn't in 343 Guilty Spark or the library, and you are just left to figure out how the Flood works entirely on your own. And I might have liked those levels the most because Cortana wasn't babbling over everything. It's weird though, because if Cortana explaining all this basic gameplay stuff was so important, then by the game's own internal logic that the player must hear an obnoxious voiceover for everything, then these two levels are deficient. While I loved Cortana in the original, her absence is extremely welcome in this game. But enough about Cortana's voice, let's talk about her visual appearance, specifically in the cutscene with her and Keyes as a proto-Gravemind. You'll notice that in the remake, the Chief puts Cortana's chip down so that you can see her hologram. This is doing away with Halo 1's original intention for what Cortana actually was. The reason you do not see Cortana in the scene is not because they ran out of animation budget, or because they didn't have the technology to render her or something. It's because she did not have an image. You know, in the escape pod at the beginning, Cortana says,
If I still had fingers, they'd be crossed.
this is an acknowledgement of the fact that without interfacing with something like the Autumn or the Control Center, Cortana lacks the means to project a hologram of herself. Well, hey, I figured this scene had a reason for it. They're just showing us her hologram so that we can read her emotions visually during this intense scene. Okay, cinematic necessity, whatever, I get it. Where I really started to turn against the scene was the payoff for her being so visible wasn't just her emotional reactions, but instead of the Chief plugging the Captain's CNI transponder into its helmet, linking it to the same system that Cortana is in, his suit, he sets it next to her so that she can make a hand gesture to it. This is kind of betraying the intent of the original. It's definitely a display of the cargo cult because they either dismissed or were ignorant of this idea that Cortana needed to interface with things through some kind of physical connection. She could not perform a physical process of information transfer by waving her hands around, but apparently now that is a means by which she achieves the process of information transfer. So in the original, Cortana's an AI. She has no direct means of interfacing with the world around her. She's a computer chip. When she talks to other Marines or analyzes the Covenant BattleNet, she does so through your suit's transponder. When she sees and hears the world around her, she does so through the suit's sensors and optics. She has the same eyes and ears as the Chief. Over the course of the game, she constantly makes reference to the fact that she's using the suit's systems to listen in on the Covenant or to detect Covenant movement or to calibrate your shield's wavelength to something that will disrupt pulse generators or whatever. But that's only possible because she is plugged into your architecture, which isn't so different from the Autumn's that she's so familiar with. That's why she takes to manipulating your suit so easily. Otherwise, though, she's a disembodied spirit. In fact, in the original game, there isn't even any indication that she can so much as talk without being plugged into an interface that supports the transmission of her voice. She's blind and mute in the original, which is a pretty big deal. It's reflective of the fact that she's named after a weapon, Cortana, the Sword of Mercy. And what is a weapon without a wielder? Even a most brilliant one would be nothing. But as with many subtle details, this kind of thing was either forgotten or seen as an impediment to some immediate goal. And the future of Halo has been used as a frame of reference through which to portray the original. Why was this done? Because that's how Cortana has worked in Halo 3 and onwards. I like Halo 3, it's a good game, but there's no need to retroactively impose its inventions upon the original game, when clearly it had its own underlying logic for being the way that it is. As a side note, during that cutscene with Keyes, of course, the Chief rips out the CNI transponder, which is handled drastically differently now. In the original, he punched through the face of the Captain. It was a grisly detail, followed by the Chief plugging the CNI transponder directly into his helmet. It's pretty nasty, but it also shows the resolve of the Chief given the necessity of this transponder. This sequence has been drastically changed. Of course, the Chief no longer plugs that into his helmet, but also now the Master Chief just kinda reaches over to the back of Keyes' head to pull the thing out instead of punching through his face. The reason for that is because, as with Cortana's hologram, the lore now shows that the CNI transponder is in the back of the skull, as you see on the back of Lord Hood's head in Halo 2. So the Master Chief punching through the Captain's face to get to that CNI transponder in the original would be kind of obscene and arguably unnecessary with this setup, but it wasn't the setup of the original game. The original story had his transponder evidently embedded deep in his brain somewhere, and the back of Keyes' head was fused to the flood structure anyway. Just like the longsword being shaped shaped the way it is for the purpose of cinematic benefit. This scenario, the position of the CNI transponder, the shape of the flood biomass, is not the product of some lore idea. It is for the purpose of this dramatic moment where the chief punches through the captain's face. I don't think a remake should be designed for retroactive consistency if it imposes any major cost on the original's vision. Punching through the captain's face isn't just some goofy thing to laugh about, and it's not a product of lore. It's meant to be a display of the Master Chief's grim resolve in this dark hour. That he would punch through the face of the man he respected and followed into the bowels of hell, and how he also recognizes there's nothing left of the captain anymore. He must continue the mission, regardless of his sentiments. It's a good scene. I know a lot of people think it's comical, but maybe they just didn't jive with the emotional weight of it. Having it changed to have him feel around in the back of the captain's skull and rip it out that way may be more pleasing to the eye, but it doesn't have the same intensity and tragedy and silent resolve in the Master Chief as the original. There was obviously a purposeful intent in the captain's face being obliterated after a big wind-up for a punch that did so. If nothing else, this also put an end to the facsimile of keys that defiled his body. There is a persistent haphazard use of music across this game, where music is employed without sufficient regard for how well it works during the in-game action, even though they had the original as a model. The first time I noticed this was hearing Rock Anthem for Saving the World playing a little too frequently. My immediate impression was, wait, I don't remember this song playing on the second level. As it continued during a fairly light section of gameplay after reaching the lifeboat crashed by the steep hill, I noticed how this was much less epic than the ascension from the silent cartographer or fighting on the pyramid of the control center. The gameplay did not match the grandiosity of the music. I was stunned when, later in the level, this song that originally only played very rarely, I heard it play as many times in this one level as it did in the original game. It plays at every single lifeboat you find at the end of the second level. This is very excessive. Now, this isn't terrible because, hey, at least they're using the original music, and this is exactly the kind of thing I can easily imagine an over-enthusiastic fan who likes the song doing, like a teenager modding Halo Custom Edition or something, wanting to hear this great music more often, since it's such a shame it was so rare. Lacking the discipline to appreciate that its rarity in the original game was part of what made it so memorable. At least that case is understandable from an over-enthusiastic fan perspective, but what's harder to make sense of is a terrible use of Perchance to Dream. This is a song widely renowned for its usefulness in video essays. It invites curiosity and contemplation due to its low intensity. Bungie has even used it for their interviews back in 2004, so this is hardly a new idea, but I use it all the time in my videos too. It works very well. You'll often hear it in Halo during encounters with sleeping grunts, where the enemies are unaware of you, often with the opportunity to stealth kill everyone in the area. A rare opportunity in Halo, but a memorable challenge. That's not to say that it's the sleeping grunt theme or anything so overt. It's just that it synergizes well with the action it plays alongside. It's a relaxed, atmospheric song, so it goes well with an empowering but low-intensity stealth sequence. Halo 2 and 3 use this same song during similar stealth scenarios. This reinforces a theme, a pattern, an identity that builds into the collective memory of Halo. This was done because Bungie understood the nature of their own song and employed it aptly. It is impossible to imagine this song playing on, say, the library. Imagine that. This song playing during the relentless assault by the Flood as you are guided by this mysterious, unsettling, Charon-esque figure who seems to have little regard for you. It's a very creepy and oppressive environment that leaves you feeling dread, which is why in the original game you only hear things like the Devil's Monsters theme, which is an intense, scary combat song, where you're otherwise left with the unrelenting eeriness of the ambient library suite. During the remake, the action gets interrupted with this fun little mysterious majesty of the Forerunners display, where the monitor has you look for some light bridge switches and bask in the wonder of the ring. Tonally, this is like that part on the level Halo where you have to go look for a button for the light bridge to get your warthog across the chasm, and it seems to be meant for that same idea, but it also has Guilty Spark boasting about how charming the ring is. Maybe you could put a thing like this on the Ark in Halo 3, but not here. Not on the library, which, for all that people rightly criticize it, carried a foreboding and dreadful atmosphere that never broke its stride. That perchance to dream plays during the sequence is just too much reprieve for what should have happened in the library. It makes no real sense to break the tone that badly. I was very surprised by this. Now, music can be a nebulous thing, which can vary in its application, and this song would have easily been used in other contexts without bothering me so much. A remake can certainly make that decision justifiably. I wouldn't be mad if they used this song once in a non-stealth section. That could be done. Doesn't just have to be the stealth song. Music is open to interpretation, and if they'd found some clever new application for this song I never might have imagined would work but did, had it landed well, I'd be happy, but you can't ignore the obvious and just apply a song where it has no place. The game also inverts the principle of perchance to dream on the library, because I swear I heard a bunch of creepy ambient library exclusive music on Silent Cartographer and Truth and Reconciliation where it did not fit at all. Not to say these environments were meant to feel cozy, but it imbued them with a sense of horror that was really not how they were in the original. Another one is that the creepy ambient droning from the Maw suite in the engineering bay is replaced by Covenant dance. I always found the engineering bay to be a profoundly creepy and intense area, very uncomfortable, being that it's inside of this ship that was once filled with people that you called home, and now it's just this dead thing being invaded by 3 separate armies all trying to kill you. The remake doesn't really build this impression by adding a song that's way too cool for the situation it plays in to be scary. Notably, many cutscenes run afoul of the same issue, and this is almost always terribly done. The discrepancy between this and the original game is probably because the original game had the composers working alongside the cinematics team to get the most out of the music, whereas here, whose decision was any of this? I don't know. In the interests of saving time, I'll just walk you through one example, but this happens in a lot of cutscenes. The one that stood out the most was at the end of Assault on the Control Room. Both cutscenes open with creepy Silent Cartographer music at the start, but the progression from there reflects an entirely different artistic vision. In the original, this unsettling music plays throughout because it is during this cutscene that Halo's tone shifts entirely. Befitting that, the cutscene maintains a tone of mounting dread expressed through the music. It only changes when Cortana starts to react to the flood, at which point you hear greater texture in the song when the strings kick in to reflect the growing urgency of her terrible realization. There is no peaceful reprieve in the middle or anything like that. The remake decided to have this weird moment where Cortana basks in the wonder of the ring or something and gets big and picks up a galaxy, and the moments of tension at the beginning and end of this cutscene become severed from one another. Not to say the whimsical cinematography isn't playing its own part, but the tonal shift in the music stood out to me. When you plug Cortana into the control center in the remake, you hear that awesome piece that plays when you first see the Master Chief in the cryopod, which then shifts to the Halo theme proper, then the reflective Dust and Echoes song that plays at the end. All in all, this seems like a very happy moment for some reason. The dark tone is out of the picture, and you seem to have nothing to worry about until Cortana has her terrible realization regarding the flood.
And now they're afraid.
Something buried? Where?
The captain.
And then you go
We've
back
gotta
to the
stop the
creepy
captain.
music. Maybe they wanted you to let your guard down, but that doesn't really work when the cutscene opens with creepy music anyway. The attempt to reintroduce tension late into the cutscene isn't enough to offset the breach in tone. And as a counterexample, where I was okay with what the remake did, this game plays A Walk in the Woods during the Rolling Thunder moment, which I found interesting. It's the one misplaced song that is used to pronouncedly good effect. Walk in the Woods was so deeply buried in Halo 1 that despite this being my first Halo game, for 15 years or so, I thought the song first appeared in Halo 2, where it memorably plays during an iconic tank rampage on Delta Halo. Where does it play during Halo 1? Twice. Once during the most skippable portion of the game, when you go into the rooms across the stone bridge in the Control Center Valley, where you'll find an elevator to descend to the foot of the valley. This is the last of many repetitive rooms of Assault on the Control Room, and it's easily bypassed by commandeering a Banshee. Anyway, in the remake, they cut this room and turned it into an elevator shaft for some reason. And the only other time Walk in the Woods played in the original game was during the aforementioned conversation in the Two Betrayals ending cutscene. Music that plays during a voiceover in the ending cutscene to one of the longest levels in the game is not exactly a prime time slot, so I just never noticed that this song was in the game, but here, it plays during the tank assault, when you're going up that hill and have a clear shot at all the enemies ahead of you because of the elevation. That's awesome, that's memorable, I really liked that, even though it was different. It also pattern matches Halo 2's use of the song, and I know I've complained before about things being retroactively imposed upon the original Halo, but here, this is a good model. It fits the song, like the use of Perchance to Dream in later games. The gameplay and music reinforce each other with this moment that was already awesome and high intensity in the original, now getting an awesome and rare song to go with it. I liked this enough that I thought, wow, maybe the original game ought to have done that. I'm not opposed to change on principle, but it has to be done justly. One of the most pronounced issues throughout the game is that the gameplay simply does not feel like CE. And it's not because it feels like a modern game. Oh no, it's that instead of feeling like a 25-year-old game, it feels like a certain 16-year-old game. What game do you think that might be?
It's like Reach all over again!
That's right, Buck. There is a great pollution of Reach DNA that has been infused into this game at every level, from the art style to the deepest depths of its gameplay architecture. And while the details of this could be a topic for its own 2-hour video, for now I'll just say that this is a broadly encompassing problem. The ghosts of Reach haunt this game harder than the Halo 2 soundtrack, with so many things added because Reach did it first rather than because it seemed like the right fit for CE. And whether you like these things or not, their inclusion here makes the game feel more like someone made a mod for Reach to have CE's campaign, instead of this being a purposeful ground-up remake of Combat Evolved with modern architecture, as you'd hope for it to be. Not helping the matter is that Reach itself is only marginally less dated than CE from today's perspective, and it shows. I won't get into all of the Reachisms, as there are many, but the most arbitrary of all has to be the fact that you're capped at 8 rockets max. Why? Is that because they deemed that Halo CE's original 10 was too many? No. It's because Reach had 8 rockets. So we got 8 rockets here because this is Reach and not CE. Less arbitrary, but far, far more adverse to the gameplay experience is the fact that the elites in this game are a straight import of Reach's elites, and I don't like Reach elites. I think they're terrible. They are not a fun enemy. They are ridiculously strong, and not in the way CE's elites were strong as a worthy adversary, but more like an overpowered enemy with a bunch of cheap tricks up its sleeve. The most notable of which in this game is retaining the Reach jab, where they poke you with the front of their gun and it zaps all your health, even though it doesn't look like much. You know, the melee attack from the elites in Halo CE was pretty cool, where it looks like they put their entire body into it. This serves two purposes. First, it looks pretty cool. It looks threatening, though, so you know it's bad. And it also gives you a little bit of time to dodge it. Reach has a pathetic-looking attack that is undodgeable because of how fast it is. And it just looks like a worse animation than what they did in 2001. This doesn't look like something that should kill a Spartan, and yet it does. So they put that in the CE remake. Not because Reach did a better job, it didn't, but because Reach is newer and this game is built off of the Reach architecture. That's it. I see your game campaign evolved. Your architecture isn't much different from the Reach's, and you got some funny ideas, alright. And it's easy to put into words many of my complaints, like the Moz ending cutscene, or show you how they messed up the Forerunner designs or something, but you have to get punched in the face by these elites to appreciate how miserable this is. Please watch the footage. This isn't a question of skill. This is an enemy that is not fun to fight. I implore the developers, forget about playable elites, forget about the Falcon and all the other things fans are always clamoring for. Get rid of the Reach elites, please. If the Keys escort mission has to go to appease modern sensibilities, fine. Here's my pampered modern sensibility that needs to be appealed to. I don't need Cortana telling me where the green lit door in front of me is. I want the instant kill elite jabs gone. I hate them. Get rid of them. They suck. They were bad even in Reach, and it's been 16 years. How bad does it have to be that the worst decision ever made in the Halo franchise? No, not the Forerunners being retconned as aliens. The Halo Reach elites still hasn't been given a second look from the Bungie days. Obviously, I have a lot of particular preferences. I haven't talked much about the gameplay. I'll tell you that overall, yeah, Campaign Evolved is fun. These Reach elites are terrible, though. The game would have been twice as good if they had just made the elites more like CE. One thing they did not include, unlike Halo Infinite, was the Reach art style for the assault rifle. It really is rendered strikingly well. Every time I watch footage of this game or was playing it, I just think, wow, that assault rifle is beautiful, and it looks like the Halo 1 art style in a modern rendition. I sure wish everything else was like that. It's beautiful, but appearances can be deceiving, as if you look under the finish, you'll see that this thing is a Trojan horse for the 5th iteration of the Reach assault rifle. Just look at the reticle, it's exactly the same as the one from Reach, including its animation. It has the same magazine size, a similar recoil pattern, same high initial accuracy of the Reach assault rifle. Yes indeed, if you fire this weapon in bursts, it is actually very accurate, which is not how the CE assault rifle worked at all. Now the odd thing about this is that they did try to have it both ways, because this game does include a weapon that is a wolf in sheep's clothing, pretty much identical in function to the Halo 1 assault rifle, the submachine gun, forming an odd dichotomy of semi-redundant, full-auto human weapons that has existed since Halo 3. As has always been the case, the SMG inherits or perhaps appropriates the Halo 1 assault rifle's reticle, magazine capacity, fire rate, accuracy. It is basically the same weapon in operation, if not form. But it's an odd choice to have both, given that unlike Halo 3, there's no dual wielding. The thing is, Halo 1 was Halo 1 in part, a small part, but still an important one, because the assault rifle was what it was. This was the standard issue Marine weapon, the most common human weapon, the iconic bullet hose, inaccurate, close-range powerhouse, the assault rifle. Presentation matters. Changing the assault rifle to fit the function of what a different game wanted it to do isn't really adapting the weapon from CE, is it? I do think the Reach assault rifle has a function that fits the visual profile of a rifle a lot better than the hilariously inaccurate Halo 1 assault rifle did, which is exactly why Bungie decided to reintroduce its mechanics as a submachine gun. But form matters too, and you can't switch the two beneath the surface, say the original's form is here and function there, and expect things to feel the same on the whole. Any more than you could switch the effect of the shotgun and the sniper rifle and have this game feel the same as the original did. Personally, I'm not sure there was any need to bring the Reach assault rifle into Halo 1, for a game whose sandbox is so pure with so little redundancy. Halo 1 had a remarkable purity to its sandbox, without any of the weapons, vehicles, or enemies having the same role as each other. Every weapon here was unique, every enemy had a different threat profile, and of course the simplicity was to some extent a product of the times and things being cut, but it was also a direct result of a particular focus. Instead of the modern format where you've got to have a warthog and a brute warthog, a ghost and a brute ghost, you've got to have an assault rifle, a Covenant assault rifle, a sniper rifle, and a beam sniper rifle. Halo 1 had everything define its own niche, and yet now those redundancies have been imposed upon Halo 1. Speaking of gameplay elements being unjustly imposed on the original game, the worst one from a narrative standpoint is probably how they altered some of the features and mechanics of the Flood. But first I'll talk about a seemingly arbitrary alteration to their introduction, which was otherwise well adapted. When you first see the Flood in CE, it's not immediately obvious what they are. Even when you start seeing the zombies for the first time, they're the Flood elites, and they're so mutated that they barely look recognizable. I think that for a lot of people first playing the game, as was the case for myself, you look at these things and you don't have the slightest idea what they're supposed to be. Standing straight with their heads slumped backwards, they don't look like elites, and when I first played I didn't make that connection until later, meaning I didn't know that I was fighting zombies, basically. Though many lavishingly praise the details of this mission, few fans ever seem to appreciate that you don't actually see a single human combat form until much later in the level, and I I believe there was purpose behind that. It isn't until you make the painful move to descend further into the bowels of this nightmare that you would hear the Devil's Monsters theme for the first time, the whole song instead of just the drum beat. And it is here that you will first see the horrible sight of the flood-infected humans. It is also the first time you see the Flood use weapons, and this tells you that they are turning everything they touch, technology and creatures alike, are fuel for this threat. I think that in the original, this was really the moment when you're supposed to really grasp what's happening. Only now do you see what that guy meant when he said, "You're not turning me into one of those things." The remake made a slight error, but one of consequence in the rising tension. This level is otherwise well adapted enough, but they reveal the human combat forms as soon as you leave the room, which means the game is showing its hand a little early. Part of what made the Flood such a massive gameplay shakeup is that they were completely immune to any kind of psychological effects that you might have employed against the Covenant. They don't panic like the Grunts, Jackals, or even Elites sometimes. They cannot be driven to retreat. They do not react with fear. You are fighting a pure war of attrition against a relentless foe. All your usual tricks to break the enemy's cohesion are useless. Just like with the HUD, Halo was a holistic product with the gameplay and the story created with respect to one another. There's a reason the Flood do not get scared. They are unfeeling monsters, not sentient beings, composing an all-consuming monstrosity. When you are about to run over the Flood in Halo 1, they don't flinch or try to dodge. When you stick them with plasma grenades, the Flood just continue their stride, neither with added fear nor aggression. They do not care. They don't want to survive. They want to kill and consume and nothing else. Their ceaseless march in pursuit of this end cannot be met with anything but force. They are the Flood, an unfeeling force of nature. You cannot stop a Flood by making it flinch. The Flood in Halo 1, even more than in later Bungie games, are a good synergy of gameplay and narrative. You feel the threat. This is an unrelenting force of mindless aggression, and God help you if they have rocket launchers. Rocket Flood in the original game were very annoying because they were hard to distinguish, being the biggest individual threat in the game. The remake paid special attention to these Rocket Flood, making their weapons highly visible to help you detect and counter the danger. Awesome! So I like this change because it retains their lethality but gives the player some warning. And yet there is a dire problem with the Rocket Flood. They will not fire on you when you get close enough for the rocket to threaten themselves. This is because they have the same AI rocket safety logic as Marines with rocket launchers or fuel rod grunts. Those other characters will refuse to fire on a target too close to them because they are living, sentient beings that have a sense of self-preservation and so hesitate to blow themselves up. But the Flood are meant to be suicidally aggressive, all-consuming monsters. Befitting this in Halo 1, if you were clever enough to close the distance to a rocket Flood, your reward would be for it to blow itself up along with you. It didn't care. It had no life to cling to. The Flood have an entire form of creature whose function is to explode. They have no self-preservation instinct. Self-detonation is built into their biology. The AI seems to be broken to the point that the Rocket Flood in the remake won't even use their claw arm. Likely because this game has some obscure bit of code that says rocket-wielding units are not to attack within a certain radius, code which has been translated even to cover their claw from attacking. There are other more widespread problems with the Flood. Notably, the Flood will now be startled by you and hop backwards if you suddenly appear close to them, or they'll tense up in anticipation of vehicles. This, again, fails to account for the Flood's nature. Why should the Flood be capable of fear? The first game was obviously purposeful in their implacability. It shouldn't be overwritten. The Flood show this fear now because it's a mechanic introduced in Halo 3. This game suffers from bolting that Halo 3 programming onto the original, because these are basically Halo 3 Flood, just like it's a Reach assault rifle. Halo 3 has many strong points, but the Flood getting scared was not one of them. And the first game had that much over it, at least. It was stupid when Halo 3 did this to the Flood, and it's stupid here. I don't care if this has been a problem for 20 years, it's still worth mentioning in a remake that could have rectified it. Indeed, the Flood in this game are almost a straight import of Halo 3's Flood, which means the Flood combat forms are now susceptible to sniping weapons and regular melee attacks, which went from nearly useless against them in the original game to extremely good options against them now. I don't want to assume too much purposeful intent in the original game's design, but I cannot imagine that the Flood being nearly immune to these otherwise powerful options was an accident. And as a kid, I always read it as the Flood being a construction of mutated biomass, meaning that blunt force trauma and overpenetration just didn't affect them the same way it affects the internal systems of a living creature. After all, losing their limbs and heads hardly slows them down, so punching a hole in the Flood or giving them a brain hemorrhage is useless. This seems consistent with why it's more effective to rip through them with a shotgun or explosive, or even to burn them with plasma weapons. I suppose Halo 3 justifies the melee attacks because these break them into pieces, but this runs into another issue where, as strong as the Master Chief is, nothing in the original game, save for the gameplay contrivance of being able to flip a tank, suggests that he could punch a body so hard it explodes. And it makes you wonder why the Halo 2 elite, mourning the lack of weapons with which to burn the bodies of the Flood, didn't just start smacking them with his plasma rifle. It may seem abstract how I've referred to the cultural memory being overwritten and altered, and how that leads to a loss of the memory of the original work, but there are examples of details that were important being changed in a way that I think actually harms the original. One of these is the game's adaptation of the cutscene in which the Master Chief discovers the Flood by watching Jenkins' helmet cam footage, which has a very pernicious change because this cutscene overall was not the kind of failure that most fans of the original would easily dismiss. The original is one of the most memorable sequences in the history of games, and the whole time I played the remake, I was wondering how they might ruin it. By the time I got to the level 343 Guilty Spark, I didn't have much faith, but I was amazed at how well they adapted it. Unlike Anniversary overriding subtle environmental details, the game expanded them, if anything, in a way that felt like they understood what they were adapting. Instead of deleting bloodstains, they added more, which is awesome and creepy and adds to the scene. They messed up some of the details in the cutscene, but it was quite a good one overall, to the extent that I can easily see many fans of the original preferring this version, and I wouldn't even blame them. I'm not angry that they got rid of the shot where the Chief crouch walks forward using his normal in-game animations, but there was one unjustifiable transgression. They got rid of the Master Chief shaking his head and sighing when he picks up Jenkins' helmet. This was done for the same reason that, in a detail they kept, the Chief gently sets down the body of the Marine that falls on him instead of just dropping it outright. I do not think he would have done that if it was a dead elite that fell on him. The head shake was meant to reinforce the same notion. Well, these are brief and small things. Small things add up into the collective memory of what we know as Halo. It isn't all ring explosions and world-class theme songs. This was one of the uncommon displays of the Master Chief's humanity. It showed, contrary to what many naysayers say, that he is not a robot or an empty vessel for the player soullessly investigating the scene in the course of mindlessly pursuing his mission objective. Instead, seeing this bloodbath has emotionally affected him. In this remake, they got rid of the head shake. Maybe in the next remake will instead choose to reinforce how cool the Chief is and how fast his Spartan reflexes are by having him dodge the body that falls on him so that he will not be seen setting it down gently. After all, that's basically what they did with the shot of him taking his helmet off in the longsword at the end, which is made into a cool guy action shot instead of being a contemplative moment where he relaxes, his mission concluded. This game also makes many attempts to integrate future lore points into the original game. Some of these are actually worthwhile enough, others are terrible decisions or just badly implemented. The golden rule of references to other content is that they should not hinge upon familiarity with some other source material. Another point of importance is to actually understand both the original material and the lore points that are being added. What follows is one reference to a lore concept from after the time of CE that succeeds at these points, and another which does not, which we'll start with. Spartans go MIA. Just had to be added to this game.
That's Spartans MIA.
This is another thing I can imagine an over-enthusiastic fan doing, but it's really to the detriment of the dialogue. Yes, the Marines now remark upon how Spartans merely go missing in action, even when you die right in front of them. It's paying homage to a well-established lore concept, of course. Don't think I don't know it. But the context is so damningly misunderstood that the reference fails on its own terms. The idea of Spartans being listed as MIA is that the censors running society would list list Spartans as missing in the reports. Propaganda to prevent widespread demoralization. That's a thing that happens in real wars. You don't lead with that news. But the whole arrangement only works if the fact that it's propaganda isn't widely known. It was never the intent of the original lore that this was something a common Marine would know about, because if an average Marine knew that Spartans never die and only go missing in action, he'd understand that the MIA reports are lies, and then the propaganda would backfire and nobody would believe it. And more to the point, if you watch a man die in front of you, you're not going to react by saying he's missing in action. The Marines aren't supposed to be delusional, nor would they reference some record-keeping practice in battle like this, and it was never meant to be that senseless in the lore anyway. The attempt to pay homage to this famous lore line has backfired stupendously and speaks to a lack of comprehension. But even setting all that aside, none of this Spartans never die business was in Bungie's heads when the original game was made anyway. The game straightforwardly told you that all the other Spartans are dead and that you are the last hope. And so people react to your death the way you'd expect of compatriots watching their legendary mythical soldier friend get killed. This is bad, real bad. That's a more human reaction than a hackneyed lore reference to the institutional practice of falsely declaring Spartans MIA. This is a newly introduced failing that doesn't make sense, doesn't understand the lore it's referencing, and takes a common interaction in Halo CE and reforms it into something less sensible and less emotionally intense than what was originally written. That said, there were other lore integrations that weren't so tasteless. The most interesting was something that fans have pined for ever since the Flood novelization of Halo CE came out, which, to make the Master Chief's adventure through the repetitive hallways of the library more interesting, invented a story about another reclaimer before you, a Marine that the Monitor had brought to the library, who fought through the Flood only to die not far from the Index Chamber. This is an example of imposing lore upon the original work where it's interesting enough to justify itself, doesn't come off as nonsensical, and doesn't really rob the original of much, if anything. I remember liking this idea of the Marine in the library when I read the book many years ago, and I had hoped for it to be in the game somehow, and I wasn't alone. People would go on forums, discuss the idea, yearning for it to be an actual part of Halo's story, even leading to some urban legends about how you could supposedly find this man. Well, here he is. Finally a decent use case for a remake. It's not a bad addition, it's a poignant sight. It's the only human body you see in the library, and it's the last human you will see in the campaign besides the Master Chief. And it's someone with some interesting subtext to his very presence here. So I like it. The Monitor says some bit about his inadequate combat skin, even worse than yours, and you're left to ponder how this Marine fought through waves of the Flood just like you, and yet without energy shield. That's a really good idea. One of the most memorable things that was written in the Flood novelization. I read that over 20 years ago, and I still remember it. There's a bit more to it in the book, but you do not need to have read that book to register any meaning in this scene. This all casts the other editions in an unfavorable light, highlighting the good rule of thumb that it should still make sense to those not in the know. It also neatly avoids a common problem with these kinds of editions because it does not impose itself too greatly upon the main story, which can make these editions feel like unnecessary fanfic. Instead, they place this body off the proper forward path, so it's a brief, optional sequence that does not call too much undue attention upon itself. And while it's not hard to find at all, I think this was tastefully implemented. It's probably my favorite change in the restructure of the library, maybe even my favorite addition in the game. It's really interesting, and it adds something more eventful to this level. It makes the remake's library more interesting for the same reason it made the book more interesting. Another similar lore integration I liked was the assimilated keys now having dialogue, referencing the excerpt from the Flood novel, which describes him trying to invoke his interrogation resistance training to resist the Flood trying to draw information out of his mind while he's being assimilated, which is not only emotionally heavy, but it's also an interesting idea in its own right. This humanizes Keyes, adding some flavor to his backstory as a military officer who would have naturally received such training, and expanding his role in the story in a way that I found poignant and meaningful. It also perhaps explains why the Flood are keeping him alive and himself, because they're doing so to discover the location of Earth and how to get there.
19912.
This is another idea that most would simply say they would have liked to see in the original, and hopefully this demonstrates that I am not opposed to change on principle, that the changes I criticize are those made errantly. Good examples aside, this is obviously a mixed bag, and a mixed bag isn't what you want out of a radical change in a remake. If these changes are being done for the sake of a commitment to the deepest intricacies of lore, then that's a standard that must be carefully upheld in all contexts, and there's little excuse for error. The game, however, does make some obvious errors that call this lore commitment into question. As another example, striking to me is the monitor calling it Halo.
If the flood escapes this halo, it will of course consume all viable hosts.
Far from being a minor goof, this is actually problematic if we're to accept the premise that a commitment to lore matters at all in this remake. The original games carefully wrote this character not to use terms like Halo for the same reason that he doesn't call himself the Oracle. It's significant in the story that the Monitor has no regard for the Covenant's inaccurate verbiage, as he calls it. Halo is a spirituality-imbued term coined by the Covenant, to whom the ring is an object of worship, and the clueless humans appropriated that term knowing less than the Covenant did. However, the Monitor knew better before there ever was a Covenant, and he never uses any flowery religious terms to describe what is to him a mundane, practical tool. He only ever uses terms like installation or ring. This is a bit of a tangent, but I do feel the need to complain about the needlessly butchered opening cutscene of the game with an arbitrary and inexcusable cut of the entire Pelican hangar sequence. You don't see the longsword in its hangar. You don't see the UNSC ground vehicles. Think about what it means for the game's bookend that they do not show you the longsword in the hangar, nor a warthog in the autumn. The foreshadowing is removed, and the game is no longer quite the same full circle that it once was. You also lose some characterization for the Marines, whom we no longer see gearing up in anticipation for the fight which they commit the rest of their lives to through the campaign. You don't even see the Pelican at all now, which means when a Pelican suddenly shows up in the next level, it's likely the first time you've ever seen the thing in this game. There was a lot of intentional work put into the scene that was meant to show you what the UNSC Marines were about before you see them in action, and it was cut for no apparent reason. If there was a purpose, it was the extended cut after Johnson's speech, which shows the Marines awkwardly fighting at airlocks while the Master Chief is still napping. Instances like these indicate that there were things they just did not understand about the original game. Now I want to discuss a matter of personal importance, one alteration that almost nobody is aware of, continuing a long-standing trend of erasure to this detail from the original Combat Evolved. The Scorpion tank was a two-seater. Yeah, you get in on the left in the only open seat, but if you look next to it, you will see an identical hatch to the one you jump into. And the subtext of this is that the Scorpion has a driver's seat and a gunner's seat, two separate positions. If you consider the reality of driving and shooting a vehicle at the same time, most people wouldn't be able to do that. That's why attack helicopters have two seats. That's why tanks have a driver and gunner that are separate in real life. So it makes a lot of sense that the Scorpion would have two crew positions. And the manual of Halo 1 corroborates this design, declaring that the Scorpion requires a crew of two or one cyborg. This is a great subtextual demonstration of the prowess of the Master Chief, a multidisciplinary warrior with skills in every field of combat. His mastery with everything he uses in the campaign is part of the story. He can operate the gun and drive the tank simultaneously because he has abilities beyond human measure. Only a cyborg can achieve this superhuman feat. In my mind, this small detail went a long way towards explaining why the Master Chief is the guy who has to drive, to take out those stationary guns, to get all the kills, to go on after the Marines are evacuated or killed, because you're the cyborg, the Master Chief, the last Spartan. But there's no other gameplay feature that is so overtly confirmed to be unique to you. But they did away with that second seat in sequels. It's actually still there in Halo 2, complete with apparent optics, presumably for a gunner. But the original creator's vision was already being degraded because Marines would drive the tanks by themselves. Even the Arbiter could do so, having identical capability to the supposed demigod of the Master Chief. By the time Halo 3 came out, that second seat was gone, the other crew position being replaced by an external machine gun position. Even with the game being made by almost all the same people, they paved over some of the finer details that they once thought were important. Sometimes this is for the best, sometimes it's necessary, especially in video games, which are subject to many conflicting demands between art design, story, and gameplay, but still, change can easily transgress upon a profound idea, overriding something that the creators may not have appreciated the significance of, or that subsequent creators just didn't understand. So what hope is there when a game has zero of its original creators working on it 25 years later? We're not even the same country as we were in 2001. Bungie certainly isn't the same studio. Halo was handed to 343 in 2011. This detail wasn't going to reappear when the inertia is being carried by the successors of Combat Evolved rather than the image of the game itself. It's so much more convenient to simply reuse the assets from the later game instead of spending time to comprehend, model, and learn from the finer details of the original. What you might think of as a trivial change or a difference in art style wipes away what I found to be a profound point about the Master Chief's unique prowess. And it's not as if I would argue something so absurd as to say that Halo 2 and 3 are bad games, totally bereft of the spiritual essence of Halo because they fail to represent this trivial Scorpion detail. It's not that important in itself, okay? It's just the clearest example to me of how even with the finest minds, the best intentions, the original creators, every iteration of a work, like a copy of a paper or a cell losing its telomeres, gradually becomes corrupted. The information that built into its soul undergoing a slow death, like your captain gradually being absorbed into the grave mind as he loses everything that made him who he was. That grave mind is our cultural memeplex that demands such remakes and eschews a deeper appreciation of the original work. And if there's one point I want to discuss that proves beyond a shadow of doubt that Halo is deprived of its spiritual essence, it's not the Scorpion tank, but Marathon, a game which all roads lead to. Consider first a religion. Christianity has many patterns and icons, customs and practices, which have been carried through 2,000 years. But at the core of it all, underlying everything else, is the central, unifying vision of God as an all-powerful, holy, good creator. If you were to excite him and all the mysticism from Christianity and make a little club where you drink wine and sing for the sake of good vibes, I'm sure many people would enjoy it and criticize those who say something important has been lost by saying, we're just a bunch of killjoys who can't enjoy remakes just because they're different. But to remove all the underlying elements, the actual point of worship leaves the entire structure hollow. The rituals would exist as a gratuitous exercise, a cargo cult, a facade held about due to tradition rather than any appreciation of their underlying purpose. There would be no moral or spiritual purpose to any of this, and if it had any reason to be, it might be for good vibes and community, which isn't worthless, but still misses the original intention. If you were to try to start writing principled moral arguments from this empty tradition and compare it to those who still believed in the core and understood those elements and held them close, two philosophers from each of these branches would have unrecognizable beliefs from each other within a generation or two. When you look at Marathon and its relation to Halo, there was a clear appreciation for Marathon, deeply embedded in the fabric of Halo. It defined so much of this game. It's where the term rampant comes from. It has an AI named after a sword. The game is full of similarities, like the mere fact of a bunch of humans stranded on an alien world that they must uncover the mysteries of to defeat an alien threat. Whether this was a deliberate invocation of Marathon or a consequence of the fact that the game was made by the same minds with the same patterns of thought that drove Marathon, these are practically the same in effect. Either way, you have the same creative DNA. You're carrying forth the same spiritual essence from one game into the next. And that foundation is far more important than the name of the franchise being continued. It goes deeper, but I have a video committed to that matter if you find the topic interesting. Suffice to say, there is no Halo Combat Evolved without Marathon. Halo would go on to find its own stride and gradually gain an identity that was very different from Marathon, even while it was still under the stewardship of Bungie. But the foundation was critical. There is a strong spiritual essence to Halo, where the Master Chief isn't just some guy who's special because of his armor, but the embodiment of the hero that has risen throughout the history of man in our times of need, like Achilles or Gilgamesh. This idea was explicitly laid out in Marathon. It defined the spirit of myth, and it does does carry on into Halo, which is why it's full of Gregorian chanting, despite being a sci-fi FPS game. Bungie's works had a recurrent theme that cherished this concept, a principle that transcended different settings, different universes with little resemblance. The indomitable heroism of the spirit of man, sometimes embodied in a single one. This goes deeper than a few funny references or logos being cut, but they were not throwing around the Marathon logo arbitrarily. There's a reason that almost any discussion of Marathon would mention Halo as its spiritual successor. There's a reason Halo had the Marathon logo on the difficulty selection screen, the title screen of the game, the box art. It's on the Pillar of Autumn, the control center, the monitor's eye, Captain Keyes' uniform. This is not to say that the logo's presence was intended to suggest an overt literal connection here or some kind of direct story point, but simply to signal that Marathon was still something Bungie cared about, an imprint from their minds into the game, removing any deniability that the various similarities between the two reflected some intentionality. These logos, of course, had to be removed in the remake, if nothing else, in the interests of avoiding litigation, but scrubbing the Marathon iconography out of Halo might seem trivial to you, but to me, it's like if you got rid of the vocals in the main theme. It wouldn't be the Halo theme anymore, would it? The control room being in the shape of the Marathon logo was as much a part of the game's vision as the way the main theme sounds. Even if the motivation is understandable and you can't really blame the remake for doing this. Halo is now a ship that has forfeited its colors, a symbolic gesture that may not impart any metaphysical effect on the world around it, yet such symbolism has great meaning to us humans, and the reaction to hoisting a black flag on your ship is not disproportionate. Halo no longer bears the symbol of its lineage, its allegiance, and that is perhaps a perfect metaphor of how the underlying intention of the original game has been lost. Often it is asked of critics, do you just want Halo to die? And I always want to answer, well, maybe. It's not that I'm against people enjoying a new game, and I found it to be pretty fun overall. But there's a point where any franchise will become exhausted. Humans have a limited lifespan, and that's ignoring the changing of hands. The argument that a franchise should not ever be laid to rest ignores the potential for the tasteless zombification of things to the extent of The Simpsons or Call of Duty, which have been absorbed into the cultural grave mind long ago. When the original work's cultural memory is appropriated by the production of something in its name so many years later, the burden of proof is on those who would argue a franchise merits continuation and that a successive entry earns its place. No successive entry into a franchise justifies itself by birthright, and they all have something to prove. This is true of a sequel and even more true of a remake. My concern is with the cultural memory of the original, which is continually under threat by such productions, wearing away at that memory inch by inch, like a monument in the face of inclement weather. Hopefully through this video, some of what I saw in Halo that has fallen by the wayside remains to be appreciated.